Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you the story of the time I sat next to an Air Marshal on a flight. Now before we get into the story, I just want to preface it with this. I'm going to have to hide some of the details of the story because obviously I do not want to give away the identity of this Air Marshal. That could lead to safety concerns and I obviously do not want to do that. So I'm not going to change any details of the story, but I'm going to hide some. Now let's get into the story. So about a year and a half ago I was on a flight from somewhere outside of the United States into the United States. It was one of these short flights, perhaps somewhere between 2 and 5 hours long, and it was a kind of flight that goes back and forth every day, meaning you could start off the morning in the United States, fly to that international destination, and be back in the United States before night. To give you a perfect example, let's say you were flying from Boston to Toronto, Canada, and then back, but it wasn't Boston and it wasn't Toronto, but you get the picture. I'm sitting in my window seat on the right side of the plane. It's a pretty small plane, and we're soon going to take off. The last passengers are boarding and they're walking down the aisles, and the seat next to me, there's one seat next to me and it's still empty. And as I was watching the passengers who are boarding the plane walk down the aisle, I saw this really big, tall guy with a beard, and I was just thinking, please not this guy. I do not want to sit next to this guy. Now, I had nothing against the guy. Obviously, I'd never met him before. It's just that he was a big guy, and I'm a big guy, and it was a small plane, and I didn't want to be squished the whole flight. So I was sort of hoping that it wasn't going to be this guy. Turns out it was this guy. Sits down next to me. Really tall, broad guy. You could tell he had a ton of muscles, and he was wearing a baseball cap. He had a little chain around his neck, but it was sort of inside his oversized sweater that he was wearing. And he came on with like a small bag. He sat down first to let other people pass him in the aisle, and then he got up to put his bag in the overhead baggage compartment. Now, when he got up, his sweater sort of lifted up. As he raised his arm to put his baggage up in the baggage compartment, his sweater lifted up, and I noticed that he had a pistol tucked into his pants. When I saw that, I was like, oh my God, we have a terrorist on board. And I was thinking what to do. Should I call for help? Should I say something to the stewardess quietly? I wasn't sure what to do about it. And then I thought, you know what? Maybe this guy's an air marshal. Maybe he's been hired to secure the flight, to keep the flight secure. Obviously, we know that since September 11th, there have been air marshals on flights all over the United States and internationally. Even prior to September 11th, there were already air marshals on flights, but after September 11th, it really increased. So anyhow, the guy sits back down next to me, and I decide to talk to him to figure out if he is a terrorist or an air marshal. So we start talking, and the flight takes off. I'm calm. He seems like a nice guy. He's giving me good vibes. I'm not really worried about him too much, but I still have that concern that he has the gun tucked into his pants. Anyhow, the stewardess comes down the aisle. She's giving out drinks and snacks. Obviously, as an Orthodox Jew, I can't eat or drink everything that is served. Therefore, I was looking at some of the things that were being handed out to see if they were kosher or not. And this guy sitting next to me seemed to know everything. It's like, yeah, this one is kosher, that one's not. Seemed to be very knowledgeable about what was going on this flight. So we continue our conversation, and he asks me what I was doing in the country that I had just been coming from, in the country that we had just taken off from. So I told him I was there on vacation, and then I said to him, what were you doing? And he said, I've never been there. And I said, what do you mean you're coming from there? And he said, yeah, but I've never been in the country. He didn't elaborate. At that point, I remembered that I had actually seen this guy once before, because on my flight to the country that we were currently leaving, he was on that flight. So that means when we landed, I got off the plane and walked into the airport, and then I realized that I forgot something, so I ran back to the ramp and tried to get back onto the plane, and this guy was at the door and he wouldn't let me on. He was wearing a yellow neon vest, and I remembered that he wouldn't let me on the plane. So then I realized that I was sitting next to the guy who didn't let me on the plane. So obviously he was working for the airline or something, and I said to him point blank, are you a mechanic? And he said, no, I am not. And then I said, are you security? And he said, yes. And then I was calmed because I realized that he had a gun for a good reason. But then I asked him, are you allowed to tell me that you work for security, that you are securing the plane? He said, I'm not supposed to advertise it, but if you ask me, I'm allowed to say it. Then I noticed that the necklace that he was wearing, which was tucked into his sweater, all I could see was a little bit of a chain on his neck. There was this badge thing bulging out from under the sweater. So I could sort of see the form of this badge on his chest under the sweater. So that made more sense to me. I asked him if he works for the TSA, and he said no, he's not a federal air marshal. Then I asked him if he worked for the airline, and he said no, he does not work for the airline. But he did tell me that he was hired by a third-party company to secure the flight for whatever reason. So I asked this guy, how long have you been going to this destination? And he said, I've been going every single day for the past year and a half. I go in the morning and I come back in the afternoon. So basically, he was going back and forth every single day. And I said, have you never been inside that country? And he said, no, I've never visited, but I'm going to be going for the first time next week. My next question to him was, what do you do with your equipment when you enter that country? And he said, you mean the stuff in my bag? And I said, no, I mean the thing on your belt, which was probably not a good idea because the next thing that happened was he stopped talking to me. Basically, he ignored me for the rest of the flight. And we sat in awkward silence, and I realized that I asked one question too many. Anyhow, about an hour later, we landed back in the United States. He got up from his seat. We said our awkward goodbyes. And that is the story of the time I sat next to an air marshal. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.